World building was always something that fascinated me. When I was younger, and probably you can relate to that, I always imagined what was happening when, I was playing with my toys or playing video games or watching fantasy or sci-fi movies. And sure, the plot and the characters were always the focus of those stories. But for me, it is more interesting to see some casual everyday activity perform in the background, selling us the idea of how people live in this world. And with more and more media forgetting this art of calming down for a bit to get us immersed in their worlds, I got back with my memories to a game that really, truly deeply pulled me in back when I was younger. Gothic. Gothic is an interesting game. It's definitely a forgotten gem, a deeply flawed gem, but a shining and beautiful gem nonetheless. And despite that mechanically and technologically, it is not that advanced, even for its own era, especially when you look at Morrowind, the direct competition. What truly got me to spend so much hours in this game was how the world felt real to me. The premise is quite simply explained by the intro.
The king needed swords for his army, and every man guilty of a crime, no matter how insignificant, was forced to work in the ore mines of Corinus. To make it impossible for them to escape, the king sent out the best magicians of the kingdom to create a magic barrier around the entire valley. I was one of them. Something disturbed the delicate structure of magic. We were trapped inside our own barrier. 1 second of negligence was enough for the prisoners. Corinus was now under the control of the convicts. The king had no choice. He had to negotiate. He needed the ore. Month after month, the king supplied everything the prisoners needed. Month after month, they brought the ore to the edge of the barrier in exchange.
The colony, or the prison valley as it is also known, is actually quite small by pure physical size. But contrary to, for example, Morrowind, it is filled with a lot of content and it is fully handcrafted, so it never feels that small. You can actually walk from one side of the map to the other in around 10 minutes. The entire valley is surrounded by the magical barrier mentioned in the intro, and this barrier is actually a huge part of the main plot, which is not only a very creative way to explain why the player cannot leave the area, but also a constant reminder of the main premise of the game. The in-game map is a physical item that you need to acquire, and it looks like it's handcrafted by an actual person. There are no symbols or words, just terrain layout in proportion of the game world. As you can see, there is barely any large open areas that you will walk for an hour to artificially increase the map size. Anywhere you look, there is something to see and explore, and there's also plenty of hidden locations that are not shown on the map. You can see that there is also a portion of the map that is empty, and that is because it's orc territory. Too dangerous for anyone to venture and make a drawing of the area. And also because orcs do not draw maps, but that's a smaller detail. There are 3 major settlements in the colony. The Old Camp, located in the center of the map, a big and constant reminder of the main political power in the region, which is also visible from many places and can be very often used as a point of reference. The map was originally not showing the player's location, so it is a well-needed geographical point of orientation. Next one is the New Camp, a crude and freshly built camp of mercenaries and scumbags, and the Swamp Camp, which holds a sect of religious fanatics. Starting from the biggest player, the Old Camp. The Old Camp is the most powerful faction in the valley. It used to be the seat of the royal garrison that overseen the prisoners, but was overtaken by the very convict it was supposed to oversee. Now, those criminals took over both the castle and the outskirts around. You can see the guards wearing the shining armor of the royal garrison that's stationed here. They have the best quality weapons and armor, as they took them directly from the dead guards, and they also inherited the weapon storage in the castle. The old camp is situated in the middle of the valley, having control over the main roads connecting the other 2 camps. and it is also in control of the main ore mine in the north, and also the trade depot with the outside world, making it the perfect trade hub for all people living in the valley, and you can see that the game reflects that. The old camp have the most traders in the game, and you can constantly spot people from other camps hanging out in the outskirts. When you reach the castle, you can also see how absurdly rich the ore barons, the ruler of the camps, are, at least by the colony standards. The guards and ore barons live in the castle, safe behind thick stone walls, but in the outskirts the guarding duty is mostly held by the Shadows, a low-budget guards, as you can see reflected in their uniforms and weapons. If you look closer, you can even see that they got the most used up and poorly maintained armor, as they constantly have damaged or sewn parts in their uniforms. In the bottom of the hierarchy are the miners, who works in the old mine in the north. In total, 176 NPCs are living here, which is more than twice that of Solitude, the regional capital of Skyrim, but more of that later. Next one is the new camp. Seated in the far west of the map and situated mostly in a huge cavern, it is the camp of misfits, cutthroats and mercenaries. It is the biggest in terms of territory, but it's mostly open and have a lot of unused space. It is a more freedom-oriented camp, which doesn't have many rules or even guards keeping the peace like the old camp, so it's a place that have, sure, less restrictions, but it's also way easier to get mugged or bullied. It holds the new mine, which is not as rich as the old mine, and most of the ore goes to the water mages, who stockpiles it so they can blow the barriers up with its magical potential. So only a very small portion of the ore actually goes to the camp marketplace. It is definitely poorer than the old camp. The mercenaries and rogues have a much worse equipment than the regular guards of the old camp. You can see that reflected in the armor, which looks salvaged and sewn by hand. Their weapons also reflect their lack of resources, having mostly clubs and maces, which are easier to craft and maintain than swords, with only the richest mercenaries being equipped with the axes and swords. The new camp is new, not in the good way. We can clearly see that it was most probably built after the colony was isolated by the barrier, as their buildings look very crude and simplistic. The camp relies its defensiveness mostly in the geography of the location, hence the big space. Its population is 131 people, which is also more than twice. And the last one, the swamp camp, the Brotherhood settlement. This is definitely the most unique one, and it is located in the far east coast on a swamp. It's the seat of the religious faction, which doesn't have access to any natural resources, but produces swampweed, which in a colony full of criminals is worth more than gold. The swamp camp is exactly what you would expect from a settlement made of hippie religious weed-smoking lunatics. Its upper hierarchy is made of religious zealots and fanatical temple guards, and the spiritual leaders, the gurus. The rest of the camp is made up of people who prefer to smoke weed all day, rather than work to death in a deep, dark, dangerous mines. They are not that different from a typical corporate environment when you think about it. The big suits at the top, who think that they have all the might and care so much about the company, and all the common workers that's staying there just for the comfort of not working too much, and also free weed Friday. The camp is not really made defensively, but it doesn't need to be. A swamp is a repulsive area to attack just by itself. Wet, dangerous, but not really worth it, as the camp doesn't have any real natural resources. The temple guards are the elite soldiers of the Brotherhood. They are equipped very well, or even on par with the old camp guards, but they don't have any low-budget alternative militia like the old camp Shadows or the new camp Rogues, so they are few and far between. Overall, 103 people lives in the swamp. And yes, that's still more than Solitude. As you can see, the overall political setup is very strong and reflective in the game. But that's not all. You can clearly see how the economy of the region works. The old camp, having access to the biggest mine and to the trading depot in the north, get resources and products from the outside world and basically have a monopoly on them. In addition, being in the center makes them in control of a lot of the trading in the region. The new camp, who have only a small portion of ore available in the marketplace, supplement their economy with rice and schnapps production, which is a cheap alternative to the expensive food and alcohol from the outside world that goes through the old camp. Therefore, they attract the poorest people who either turn to banditry or are exploited in the mines. The little amount of ore that they produce cannot really be used to trade with the outside world, so the only thing that they can do is to buy from the old camp whatever they are lacking. The Brotherhood, on the other hand, creates a massive amount of weed, which, in a colony full of convicts and miserable depressed miners, bring massive amounts of profits, as you can see reflected in some of the quests. The game even have a great bit of political dynamics, as later in the game the old mine gets flooded and the old camp, now devoid of their main income source, starts hostilities with the new camp. What's brilliant about all of this is that the game barely talks about all of that. All of that information is purely in the environmental design and interwoven in the broader context of quests. But no one is screaming at you the new camp is poor or that the Brotherhood is insanely rich from the weed trade. There is very little exposition in the game. All of this is created with the thought that this is how it works, and the rest is left for the players to experience. And that's just a tip of the iceberg. There's plenty of ruins of different use and architecture suggesting that this entire valley used to be something else before. You can feel the history of an entire valley by just observing the environment. And the forests, oh god, the forests feel so good. They are dark, moody, and dangerous. You don't want to be there, at least not in the beginning. I always remember that I felt so much warm and safe inside the camps, specifically because of how dangerous the forests were. The same goes with the creatures and animals living here. Not all animals attack you on the spot. They make noises and threaten you to go away. Some will even start to run away if they are wounded. They fight each other, they eat each other, they go to sleep. All of that tells the world actually is living and breathing outside the player. You can see how the world being small makes it feel so big. No space is wasted. The small prison camps have more residents and content than big cities in games like Skyrim, Oblivion, or other grandiose RPGs. Being so small, and yet having so many NPCs, feels also appropriate. When you think for a bit, when I'll tell you that there are a couple of hundreds of convicts in a prison colony, then yeah, that sounds plausible, and therefore more immersive. Contrary to 1,000 people in an entire huge region of a big fantasy empire. So next time a game tells you how big of a world it has, maybe look for how smaller scale can be more beneficial to the immersion of the storytelling, and look for games like Gothic. Of course the game is not perfect. There are issues with it, and there are mechanics that were half-cooked or just ignored, and it is blatantly clear that it was rushed and unfinished by the ending chapters. However, this is not a game review, but a world-building dissection, and for all its problems as a game, Gothic has an amazingly and detailed crafted world-building, which gets even better in the sequel, which I hope to talk about more in the future. And that would be all for today. Remember to subscribe, comment, and all the other ritualistic magical words that YouTube algorithmic gods want me to say. And I hope to see you on the next one. The camp relied its defensiveness mostly in the geographic